Kao the Kangaroo! It's time to dive back into the Eshop Dumpster, where I find a cheap game to see if it's worth the small price I paid for it. Now, some of you might be confused, as you might have actually heard of this title, and wondering how could this be an Eshop Dumpster game? The series has been around since the year 2000. Luckily, they've improved the model a little bit better since the first outing. This game is usually $29.99, but there was a recent sale for $1.90, and I couldn't resist. Playing this, I have to say, it's a mess. This game has so many bugs. Ones that took away my moves, and I had to reset the game to fix it. Or one that made it so I couldn't hit the boss. The most common bug that you're going to run into is the music will screw up, or just go away entirely, and have to deal with some of the sound effects working, and others just being silent. Also, the frame rate in the later levels is just awful. It's always playable, but it does feel like they tested the earlier levels more than the final ones. That being said, this isn't a bad game. I would say it's a slightly above average one. It has a few interesting ideas, but instead of expanding on them, they just keep repeating them, which was disappointing. The levels always felt too long, especially one of the last levels. It took me over 40 minutes, and in the end it had a bull whack-a-mole sequence that if you fail too much, you're gonna have to do the whole level again. I was terrified that that would happen. Luckily, I did get on the second try, but it was close. This is a 3D platformer, and unlike Mario Odyssey or Banjo-Kazooie, it's not really an open world. While the levels were fairly linear to the goal, there are a lot of side paths which you could take to find more coins, the letters K, A, and O, heart pieces, or most likely a pointless gem. Each of the areas that you explore are split off from the open world hub, and I loved those areas. These often had all kinds of secrets, and it did make me wish the game was more open like this. There are runes you can collect, and these are used to open the levels. Each of the levels has about 3 to 4 of them, but the way they're set up, it's more there to help you figure out how far you are into the level. They're very easy and obvious to collect. It felt like they should be tied into finishing the level, not just progressing in it. At the end of each world, you're going to have to fight a boss, and they're broken down into phases where you have to figure out the gimmick of that part of the fight. The first boss was actually pretty challenging, but they strangely just kept getting easier. The final boss of the game had 2 phases, and in the last phase, they have you do multiple things to stop him. Now, he's going to constantly be swinging a weapon at you, but you quickly realize you're faster than him, and if you just keep moving, he just won't touch you. It was the easiest fight in the whole game. It was so easy, I thought they were setting up a real final boss, but no, there's a cutscene and then credits roll. Speaking of the credits, they can't even get this right. The jerky motion of these credits was giving me a headache. Why can't this be smoother? Now, as much as I've been complaining this whole review, it's actually because I didn't hate this game. This game is the definition of a little bit above average. Something that you're like, that's interesting, but not that interesting, if that helps you. This could have been so much better if they just put a little bit more effort into it, but I still kind of enjoyed it at times, even with all the ridiculous bugs. The story is confoundingly stupid. It never made any sense, because it would never decide on what the main thrust would be. It should have been finding your family members, as that is the most common story thread, but then they have confusing plots about crystals, and an unseen person trying to take over the lands. Also, your gloves can talk to you. This fact is brought up very sporadically, so much so I forgot about it entirely until the end of the game. It doesn't help that the writing is so dense, and it would often say 100 words when 10 would do the job. Most of it is voiced, and as much as I've been talking about in other games how voice acting is very important, I should actually clarify. Good voice acting. The main character is very flat, and all the voiced characters kind of felt like they won a contest to voice a character, as they were all fairly terrible. The writing is filled with stolen lines from movies, like they're saying, you know those movies, so that means you're gonna like it because he knows all those movies. Isn't he so cool? Kao the Kangaroo was a buggy mess, but if you look past that and try to enjoy the game, it's fun enough. It only took me 6 hours to beat it, and while the levels never blew me away in creativity, it had glimmers of interesting ideas. Now, this is normally $29.99, and it is definitely not worth that, but if you can get this on a good sale, I think you could have a good time with it. As a platformer, I think it's slightly above average, as long as you go into it understanding that it is not a well-polished game. If you do that, you can enjoy it, but I would still wait for it to go on a very deep sale.